Very warm welcome to EPG Pathshala, and today we'll be doing the module on gender and livelihoods, which is part of the paper on gender and social work. And I'm Dr. Swati Banerjee, Associate Professor at the School of Social Work at Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. When we talk about livelihoods, there are a lot of meanings and intrinsic understanding to it. We'll try to understand and grasp those different meanings and see how gender play out within those complexities. So some of the key topics that we'll discuss today would be trying to understand what is livelihoods, and then within that, how do we understand the gender differentials in livelihoods, and what are those areas of inequity or the areas of inequality that we need to try and understand as social workers or as development practitioners. How do we also understand some of the key concepts and constructs in livelihoods and the different approaches to livelihoods, ranging from some of the traditional approaches to moving towards revisioning livelihood in terms of alternate approaches like sustainability. We focus a little bit more on sustainability because that's an evolving understanding, and trying to see what are the different concepts and different frameworks in sustainability. And finally, we also try to look at how this would lead to a more sustainable and equitable livelihood practice. So it's not just about trying, understanding, analyzing, but how do we also understand critical frameworks which should help us in practice. We begin with what could be possible gender differentials in livelihoods. When we talk about livelihoods, it's about access and control, and a lot of times the entrenched gender hierarchies that exist in our society fails to recognize this different or women-specific needs in terms of economic needs, or the differential access and control that women have vis-a-vis the gendered hierarchies or the inequities that exist in society. This also leads to differential control of assets, differential control of resources. Like, for example, Agarwal has said this also could be seen in employment. Employment is often taken as a principal measure of women's economic status, in contrast to that of property ownership that is often controlled by men. So, often in our understanding and in a lot of livelihood programs like National Rural Livelihood Mission, etc., we often don't try to understand some of the inherent hierarchies, like, let's say, control over land, control or ownership over house, etc. It's more towards geared towards livelihood programs, are more geared towards income generation, employment generation, etc. The need for, like we have said, the need for women to have independent rights to land is also often overlooked. Now, India being a primarily agrarian economy, that's an important understanding which we often overlook. Also, wage gap and sexual division of labor confine women to low-paying jobs, and this also prevents them from challenging their subordinate positions within their household and also outside. We look at and examine some of the common perceptions about women and men and vis-a-vis their access to resources, and let's see how that disadvantages them. For example, we have this interesting picture here which talks about there is this person sitting here. She's supposed to be an important person, an important officer, and somebody tries to come in, and they say, no, this is not her secretary, she is the person itself. So a woman sitting in an important position is often thought to be impossible, and the popular perception is that the woman could be doing secretarial job or other job, though women have kind of come up and shattered some of this glass ceiling, this is still a reality for many women, where there are these common perceptions that men do some things, women do some things across different groups, across different classes, and that certain positions are largely for men. Within this gendered constructions, this gendered equalities, now let's try and understand the basic concept of livelihood. So Robert Chambers tries to define this basic concept of livelihood by trying to say that livelihood is a means of living which largely depends on three key factors, which includes the tangible assets or the resources, for example, land, water, house. It also includes intangible assets, for example, access to these resources. Let's say resources would be there. For example, let's say we have water facility in the village, but is it equally accessed by different groups, different communities, different caste groups in the village? Similarly, let's say that there is a house that is there that is shared by a particular household, but do women and men have equal rights over that house? Perhaps no. It further tries to explain that capabilities is also an important construct when we try to understand livelihoods, and it helps to understand people and their coping abilities and the opportunities that they have or they do not have, and the diverse freedoms again that they have or do not have. Livelihoods, therefore, is a concept which encompasses not only living but people's lives, and tries to understand not only availability of resources but access of resources, and how do we use those resources, are we able to use it or not able to use it, how do we try and understand this from a gendered lens. Now, some of the typical areas of inequality or inequity when we try to understand this tangible and intangible resources in terms of availability of resources and access to resources, and how does it play out, let's say, within the household for women. One key factor would be differential control over access to resources, which could be natural resources, human resources, physical, financial, social, all of that. Workloads, yes, there is gender division of labor within household. Then there is this hierarchy that gets created between certain household tasks over productive tasks, or reproductive tasks over productive tasks, multitasking, length of the working day, etc. For example, we visited this dairy farm, and this man was very proudly talking about how he owns that dairy and he does all this work. Then his wife was standing very close to him, and I also saw her, she's collecting all the cow dung from there and cleaning that place. Now that kind of maintenance work often goes unnoticed, and the woman is not considered to be part of the owner of the dairy. So how do we understand those kind of division of workloads, and how it's important to understand the concept of livelihoods? Yes, access and control over monetary, non-monetary benefits, decision making within the household, and we realize that often women have less decision making power. And finally, all this also translates to well-being, which could be health, which could be freedom, which could be domestic violence, which could be mobility. We know that still, for example, in most households, women in India or women in rural India would be the last ones to eat. We also know that there is a very high incidence of certain kinds of disease, iron deficiency disease, etc. with women, essentially because the well-being of women comes last. So therefore, livelihoods is a very holistic framework. It's not just about employment or employability on income generation, it's also about well-being, and how this well-being is experienced differently by different groups of people. So let's try and understand now the context of marginalized livelihoods. I'll take you through this example of Katkari tribal communities, largely from Raigad, Maharashtra. And what you could see here is, something like a house that is there at one end, and we could also see people working in the brick kiln and essentially in very, very oppressive conditions. Now we will try and see the different facets of lives and therefore livelihoods, how this is embedded in the lives of this Katkari communities and Katkari women, and what are the contexts of marginalization that is there within livelihoods. So this particular community earlier had a very close relationship with the forest, but today the forests are degrading and there is essentially an alienation from the forest and from their traditional culture. To bring in one of our field experiences, when we were talking to one of the older Katkari women, and she said that most of her life she had never gone out of her hamlet, but then there was some activism happening, and she, as part of a larger group, came to Mumbai and came to Mantralaya to demand for their rights. And she said it was the first time that she was coming out of her hamlet and coming to Mumbai, which was itself very overwhelming, and then to meet a government official. Now, as soon as she goes inside the cabin of the government official, he starts shouting on this group of Katkari men and women. He says, "You are again here. What are you doing here? You are the people who are depleting the forest and coming in." So this old woman was telling us that she said, when I went into his office, I saw all these wooden furnitures and I touched it and I felt it. And then when this officer shouted on us, I could no longer control, and I told him that yes, till now, we were also thinking where our forests are disappearing. You would continuously tell us that we are the thieves of the forest. But today I realize as I come to your office that our forests have literally come into your office. It's all your furnitures here are wooden. Now that's the kind of alienation that's happening of these communities, and it also therefore leads to a transition and more marginalization of their livelihoods. It also leads to denial of land rights. They do not have rights to land. The Katkaris, they don't have livelihood opportunities in the hamlet, therefore they have to migrate. There is forced seasonal migration. There is unequal wages for men and women. There is all kind of atrocities that is happening in the brick kiln. There is lack of representation. There is exploitation and injustice. There's lack of leadership and mobilization. So it leads to a multiple context of marginalization with respect to their lives, with respect to their livelihoods, and any livelihood intervention need to understand this context, without which many of the livelihood interventions fail. For example, often we have seen a lot of government programs having SHGs with these groups who migrate seasonally. And it doesn't work because the groups are not there. So how will they collect money every month? So it's the contextual understanding of this multiple processes of marginalization is therefore very, very important. There are different approaches to livelihoods, which includes the more traditional approaches in terms of livelihood being considered as just an economic activity. For example, agriculture in rural areas, employment in urban areas, can be defined as a means of living and sustenance. Many of the poverty alleviation programs that we have is targeted towards basic needs and income generation. Simultaneously, there are these alternative approaches which is focusing towards sustainable livelihoods, and Chambers defines sustainable livelihoods like we have discussed earlier as a means of living, and which consists of different kinds of resources and opportunities to be able to use those resources. So most livelihoods encompass a wide range of activities for a majority of the communities, especially in poor and marginalized communities, that goes beyond just employment. Let's examine how does, for example, the understanding of employment plays out. As we all know, employment refers to the exchange of labor services for payment in cash or kind, meaning employment is linked to paid productive work. However, there is also inequity or inequality there vis-a-vis workplace or labor market, and the gender division of labor that we always talk about when we are talking about women and gender relations is also seen here in terms of wage gap, which could be discrimination, it could be violence, etc. There is also, some of these causes of inequality also stems from lack of training and skills, lower level of education, the kind of reproductive roles and maintenance roles that women have in the society, and societal sanctions on mobility. There is this, very used conversation that is often there largely with middle class people. Let's say the daughter has got something in a country abroad, higher education opportunity in a country abroad. A common saying would be, it's great that she has got, but let her get married and go. So there are this societal sanctions of mobility which often determines what is the kind of work you do, what is the kind of education you get, etc. And again, this is across all classes and different communities, it plays out differently. Alternate approaches. Some of the, within the alternate approaches, we'll highlight here the sustainable livelihoods approach, which is a very important people-centric approach in trying to understand livelihoods, and some of the basic tenets which the sustainable livelihoods approach look at is capability, equity, and sustainability. So how do we deconstruct it within the context of sustainable livelihoods? Capability would refer to an ability to make full use of livelihood opportunities and a capacity to deal with adverse scenarios, including stress and shock. Equity would refer to not just income equity, but also equitable access to assets, capabilities, and opportunities. Here, like Amartya Sen has said, for equity or for freedom, we also need to remove unfreedom like poverty, etc., illiteracy, etc. Sustainability. Sustainability refers to both environmental sustainability in terms of global concerns of pollution, deforestation, etc., and simultaneously social dimensions of maintaining livelihoods along with preserving the asset basis. So this understanding of sustainability has been an important framework which has also helped us to reimagine the context and the understanding of sustainability from a very traditional approach. Development, not economic growth at the cost of marginalized communities, is an important understanding in this context. And the need to introduce citizenship to the debate, to reimagine development as people-driven and participatory. For example, Sumi Krishna talks about this concept of citizenship and livelihoods quite prominently. Also, this talks about livelihood not just as material resources, but as a political right and right with dignity. Now we come to the different sustainable livelihoods frameworks. It also essentially helps us to look at how do we not only understand sustainability, how do we not only understand livelihoods, but through these frameworks, how do we look at analytical categories for practice and transformation? We start with the sustainable livelihood frameworks, which essentially places people at the center and then tries to understand the different assets and capitals that they have. Some of the important assets and capitals that is described by a lot of sustainable livelihood frameworks, including DFID, IFAD, etc., includes human capitals like health, nutrition, natural capital like land, trees, forest, economic assets like savings, credit, wages, social capital or social resources like the networks and the connections people would have in terms of neighborhoods, kinship, the physical assets like the infrastructure in terms of transport, roads, vehicles, etc. For example, a lot of times we see that we are looking at production and marketing, but there are no proper roads. So how do you reach the produce to the market? And tools and technology, etc. Therefore, we understand that if we are to place people at the center and women at the center, or use a gender-centric approach to this understanding of capitals, how it plays out differentially for different groups of people. For example, if we look at landless female agricultural laborer, for example, we see that the kind of capital or assets she would have would be different from somebody who is landed or from you and me, for example. Simultaneously, we also see how the policies, the institutions, the processes also impacts the access to the different capitals or assets of the poor and marginalized groups, and simultaneously shapes their vulnerabilities and marginalities. This is the Sustainable Livelihoods Framework given by DFID, which primarily talks of having the people in the center, particularly poor and marginalized communities, and through an understanding of the assets that they have and the influence of policies and processes, trying to understand their vulnerabilities and try and see how do we transform their vulnerabilities through certain livelihood resources and look at a more positive livelihood and development outcome. There are many livelihood frameworks. One is the DFID, which you have just seen now. The other would be IFAD. Now, what is the difference between some of these frameworks? For example, the IFAD framework not only places people at the center, but also tries to look at the various differentials or the intersectionalities which people have and how that influences their access to assets. Simultaneously, another important point which this framework looks at, and not the DFID framework, is the aspirations people have. And it's very important to understand people's aspirations to look at alternative livelihood strategies to ensure that it is not another top-down strategy which we often see getting implemented but not really impacting people's lives. A quick example would be a lot of this housing program in the tribal areas. One such housing program was for a tribal community, and it was implemented when they had migrated. They came back and they actually pulled out the windows and the doors, which was made of wood, and used it as fuel because the structure of the houses were not related to their way of life and their aspirations. So it's very important to have this contextual understanding. Finally, to conclude and to place gender within this whole discourse, we realize that women's rights, the discussion on women's rights and struggle started with the first wave of the feminist movement, and the discussion also came within the Indian context. However, though women kind of gained access to public sphere, it was often limited, and largely women remained within the private spaces, which limited their access to resources. And especially with marginalized communities, we see that the dichotomy between public and private space, how it impacts poor and marginalized women. Women from these communities have traditionally been working outside the house, which is often not taken into account by many of our mainstream understanding. And in a lot of places we see women have also, a lot of women from marginalized communities have worked towards also protection of their resources, including the forest. For example, the Tebhaga movement in West Bengal, it was over the rights to produce over land, where it saw a large number of women peasants in positions of leadership. However, when land titles were granted by the state to peasants, often rights to women were denied or not seen. This therefore kind of sums up the inequities that exist vis-a-vis access to different livelihoods, resources by women, and how can we, through the understanding of equity, capability and sustainability, try to transform these unequal relationships towards a livelihoods, especially of marginalized communities, where there is not only equity, more capacity development, skills training, but the basic right of dignity. And some of the good references in this direction would be Veena Agarwal, Robert Chambers, Sumi Krishna within the Indian context, and some of these understandings would help you deepen it. I will end this discussion through an example more in terms of pictures, to say that when we talk about livelihoods promotion, it's not just on paper, but it can be actually practiced. And this is an example where we try to reach out to the flood-prone areas in Bihar, and trying to see how do we work towards survival mechanisms and livelihood options for people. So these are some photographs of the people inflicted by the Bihar floods, and our strategy was to reach out to the most unreached places where no intervention had happened till then. And we tried to, through a participatory manner, understand the needs of the people, and then try to intervene with the local communities in various forms. It was with women, it was with children, it was trying to look at medical intervention and trying to generate alternative sources. And the key point of all this intervention was trying to understand people's concerns through various participatory methodologies. And I'll end here and say that it's very important to take action, and the overall goal, therefore, is to enable poor, vulnerable and marginalized women, men and communities to make use of choices, spaces and opportunities in the economic, social and political spheres for their improved well-being in sustainable ways. And not only that, but the ability to negotiate the unequal societal structures, and that kind of sums up the understanding of livelihoods and gender in livelihoods. Thank you so much.